Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Caspian Policy Center. My name is Efkan Nifty. I'm the CEO of the Caspian Policy Center. Welcome to the first annual Caspian Security Conference hosted by the Caspian Policy Center and the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at the U.S. National Defense University. We are very excited to host this event together our colleagues with the NISA Center. And first, I'd like to thank all my colleagues at the CPC for putting all these efforts to bring this event together. And I'd like to thank all our speakers to be here. And we have a very distinguished panel, and this conference seeks answers to the question, what comes next for the Caspian region after the withdrawal of US and NATO forces from Afghanistan? This summer, we witnessed the end of America's longest war, and with its conclusion, new questions emerged about the relationship between the United States and the Caspian region. The goal of this Caspian Security Conference is to bring together those who were affected by the events in Afghanistan so that we may all understand what has happened and how to proceed with unfinished work. Once again, I'd like to welcome all of our attendees and thank all of our attendees from the Caspian region and the United States and beyond. I know we have a lot of registrations, and I hope everyone will find this conference helpful. This is not just the first conference that we are having in this regard, but hopefully it's not going to be the last one. We'll continue this tradition. I'd like to especially now welcome to our moderator of this discussion, Brian Todd, from NISA Center at the National Defense University. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Efkan, for your opening remarks. Today, we are joined by several highly distinguished diplomats and academic experts, and we will begin with each of our panelists briefly presenting opening remarks about Afghanistan's ties to the Caspian region and the role that Caspian countries can play to further engage Afghanistan in regional discussions. Participants are welcome to submit their questions for the panelists using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen at any time. Following opening remarks, we will have what I hope will be a robust discussion about formulating a unified regional response to Afghanistan. Today, we're going to begin with Victor Kepiani. Mr. Kepiani is the chair of the Georgian think tank GeoCase. His interests include international relations, security, governance, and implications of the global order for Georgia and its neighbors. He regularly covers these topics both in English and Georgian language media outlets, and he is also a frequent commentator on political developments in Georgia, as well as on various global geopolitical trends and events. Mr. Kepiani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Todd. Thank you for this kind introduction. Indeed, ending the war in Afghanistan is not just about ending a war. It raises quite sensitive questions about objectives on the Western agenda and how those objectives could have an impact on the Eurasian security landscape. In that respect, and taking into account that the Greater Caspian region is a linchpin when we speak about the broader security design in Eurasia, definitely the consequences of or repercussions pulling troops out of Afghanistan are not just the matter of the military standpoint, but the developments with broader and geopolitical objectives. So hopefully we will touch on those issues more broadly and more widely in the course of our discussion. Thank you so much, indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Kepiani. We turn now to Yar Mohabit. Mr. Mohabit was formerly Afghanistan's Charge d'Affaires in the United States from 1994 to 1997. Prior to this, he was an architect for the United States Army in Germany, where he assisted in renovation projects for the 97th General Hospital. Mr. Mohabit is now the president of Forest Grove LLC as an architect based in the United States. Mr. Mohabit, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the beautiful introduction. I've seen fall of Afghanistan to Taliban for the second time. I was the Charge d'Affaires of Afghanistan in 1996 when Kabul fell to Taliban. We will talk about that in details, but the coming of Taliban could destabilize the region or stabilize the region. It could go both ways. Afghanistan, it's a very small country, but the location makes it very, very important, because on either side, when you see all these countries, like on west, you see Iran, on the east, you see Pakistan, India, on the north, you see all these new Republican Russians, and then further the Caspian countries. And every one of those countries, they need Afghanistan to, if China wants to send stuff to Iran, they need Afghanistan, or Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, or other countries that want to sell their gases to Pakistan, India, they need Afghanistan. So we need a stabilized Afghanistan to help the Caspian countries and also the neighbors countries. And how we could achieve that, it's the question that, I mean, we have to talk about that. And it's very important for all these countries surrounded by Afghanistan, and also all the other countries too. So we will talk about that in detail.
Thank you, Mr. Mohabit. And now we'll hear from Ambassador Farid Shafiev. I think he's online. Yes, there he is.
Yeah. Well,
Ambassador Shafiev is chairman of Azerbaijan's Center of Analysis of International Relations. He previously served as Azerbaijan's ambassador to Canada and the Czech Republic, and he is the author of numerous op-eds, articles, and several academic publications, including the book Resettling the Borderlands, State Relocations and Ethnic Conflict in the South Caucasus. We turn now to you, Ambassador Shafiev.
thank you very much, Ms. Todd. Indeed, though the South Caucasus is not immediate neighbor of Afghanistan like Central Asia, but there are some joint projects. At least we had some discussion. For example, it was already mentioned about the gas pipelines and oil pipelines through Afghanistan to Pakistan. Also, Azerbaijan supported the previous government effort to build a lapis lazuli corridor, which might, discussion might reemerge again. In our point of view, let's say the common, the junction is Azerbaijan participated in peacekeeping operation in Afghanistan, and was the last troops along with the Turkish troops which left Kabul airport and helped to evacuate some NATO countries' troops. Another important issue, for the South Caucasus and the larger Greater Caspian region, is the nature of the NATO mission, US mission in Afghanistan. It's not just purely peacekeeping operation we had. It was more, besides the peacekeeping itself, it was about governance. And that brings discussion about what the United States and Western partner achieved in Afghanistan, where it failed, and what's the impact of their withdrawal, at least in this manner. So probably these two issues, South Caucasus, Afghanistan linkages, and the impact of the withdrawal, along with the future of engagement of the region with the new government, new leadership in Afghanistan is important to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shafiev. We turn now to Dr. Timur Shaimurganov. Dr. Shaimurganov is currently a Vice Minister of Defense and Aerospace Industry in Kazakhstan and an Honorable Research Fellow under the President of Kazakhstan at the Kazakhstan Institute of Strategic Studies. Additionally, he teaches foreign policy analysis at the Institute of Diplomacy and the Academy of Public Administration. We turn now to you, Dr. Shaimurganov.
Thank you so much, Brianna. Can you hear me? Okay, dear colleagues, for Central Asia and the Caspian region, today Afghanistan is a factor of regional stability and national security. But before speaking how our countries can contribute in the situation in Afghanistan, we need to look what's going on there. Well, our understanding is that the capture of power by Taliban is just only intermediate stage, with just only the beginning of conflict in the country, and large internal Afghanistan crisis may still come ahead. Because as we see, seizing the power by military force is one thing, and retaining power and building a peaceful life is completely different. And we don't think that Taliban is capable to build some peaceful life in the country. So especially, we cannot finally say that Taliban completely controls Afghanistan. It's just dominating in Afghanistan because there is official opposition in Panjshir Valley in the north and expansion of ISIS. These are indicators of unstable power of Taliban in the country. So second is the Taliban movement is not recognized in the world, and it's very correct, since legally the Taliban is a terrorist organization. So, for example, in the diplomatic dimension, we see a lot of challenges. For example, what about the issue, the Taliban's diplomatic presence at the former Afghan embassies in our countries? Will it mean that offices or terrorist organizations will legally open in civilized countries like Central Asia? Will their employees, as the Taliban members, will be covered by diplomatic immunities in our countries? And how to deal with the situation when Taliban diplomats probably will legally spread their extremist ideology in the countries where constructive Islamic trends are widespread? This is a national security issue. Third is the ISIS rising in Afghanistan is an emerging crisis for Taliban. Just interesting to see how the military political balance in the country will change when the ISIS fighters expand their influence around the country. So as we know, the ISIS has a lot of people from Central Asia, from different other regions. So for us, it's a huge challenge, and Taliban has no any answer on these challenges to their power. The fourth, Taliban and drug So regarding to Taliban from actions, because it's a huge part of their economy. And there is another threat for Taliban that if they will press some local governors and warlords to the provinces who now support Taliban to refuse from drug production, so these people, these authorities and warlords can just turn to ISIS flag that does not prohibit drug production. So summarizing our assessments, just I would say that today Afghan crisis has just entered to a new uncertain stage. And there is no any scenario how it can go on, because we see that situation will change in the coming months, just in the winter, when the economic situation will be worsened critically. So what about the countries in Central Asia? How we see, what can we do now? What we just can concentrate on humanitarian aid to Afghan people. We worry about Afghanistan and we send food products to the country. And for example, in Kazakhstan, we allowed to Afghan people who just entered to our universities to start their education, to receive visa to Kazakhstan, and thanks to these people today live a normal life and have a chance to survive. And secondly, we cannot influence the internal situation in Afghanistan, but we can go on strengthening our national security and collective security in the region. So, because while the active destabilization in Afghanistan, all the risks associated with drug trafficking, radical religious ideologies, illegal drug trafficking, and illegal migration are very real. So these are very undesirable effects for our region, and we can just work in this direction to increase our national security. And in general, I think that we should thank the United States for the great and very unpleasant work that the United States has been done during 20 years in Afghanistan. Thanks to the United States, we in Central Asia had 20 years of stable development. In Kazakhstan, the American contribution to regional stability has always been highly appreciated, and in context of current chaos, it looks very noticeable. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shaimarganov, for your analysis. And now we'll hear from Dr. Akram Umarov. Dr. Umarov is a Fulbright visiting scholar at the Center for Governance and Markets at the University of Pittsburgh and a research affiliate at the Tashkent Jean Monnet Center of Excellence for European Studies. At the University of Pittsburgh, he is currently conducting research for an academic project titled The Reset of Uzbekistan's Policy Towards Afghanistan as a Centerpiece in Partnership with the United States, Opportunities and Constraints. Dr. Umarov, we turn now to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Todd. And I'm delighted to be a part of this very important panel. Thanks a lot for this invitation. So briefly, 3 issues which I would like to underline. First of all, I think this developments in Afghanistan increased from one side agency of Central Asian countries. So they are now very active in dealing with Taliban, in establishing some links with this movement. And they are among the very few countries which actually still have working embassies and diplomatic missions in Afghanistan, not just embassies in Kabul, but also some consulates in northern Afghanistan, in western Afghanistan. So this is important to mention. But from the other side, and we were very active in visiting Kabul, in talking with Taliban, discussing these issues. But from the other side, this is still happening mainly on bilateral level. So this is something which I have some concerns. I would like to have more regional approach to Afghanistan. And we had some meetings on a regional level, but again, all these meetings were under this shelter of these bigger regional organizations, which involves extra regional actors. They all actors like Russia, China, Turkey. Still, it's important to discuss Afghanistan within these formats. But I think, again, taking into consideration our experience of dealing with Afghanistan for the previous 20 years, I think we need more regional approach to this issue. So I would like to see more Central Asian, let's say South Asian meetings on Afghanistan, mostly with regional countries taking lead on these issues. Why do we need to discuss all these issues? Again, it's too far from Afghanistan, in Brussels, in Moscow, and in other parts of the world. Why we cannot bring all this discussion to Ashgabat, to Tashkent, to Tehran, to Islamabad? So I think we need to think more about this and to have some lessons from our previous experience. From the second issue, despite all these activities in Afghanistan, which Central Asian countries mostly define with the word of pragmatic approach, I think still Central Asia has many concerns on the developments in Afghanistan. When one of the reasons why we are so active, I think it's from the Central Asia had options, either to work with Taliban, to deal with it, or to isolate it. So isolation was considered as something which was uncertain implications for the region, and which could bring more uncertainty, more challenges, more threats in comparison with talking with these people and try to understand their issues, their concerns, their priorities and interests. So this is something which we should consider while assessing the regional response to Afghanistan. And finally, these challenges which are still emerging from Afghanistan, they are still on the agenda. They haven't left us. So these challenges of rising, that Afghanistan can be a platform for different terrorist and extremist organizations, that drugs trafficking has still important. And also the thing which less mentioned now in the media, the huge amount of weaponry which was left in this country. So United States and its allies spent hundreds of billions US dollars to arm Afghan army, to support its activities for military training. So all this weaponry has left in Afghanistan, and its fate is still unclear. Who is controlling it? How it's going to be used, it's still unclear. So that's why we need to talk with these people to understand the fate of these issues. And finally, Central Asian countries invested a lot in building relations with Afghanistan in the previous period. A lot of trade is going on and many projects are planned. So just to leave them because of this dramatic change in Afghanistan would not be a pragmatic approach to this country. and would leave all these important initiatives without unclear future. So thanks a lot, my initial remarks. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Umarov. We will now begin with the discussion segment of this session. As a reminder to everyone, participants are welcome to submit their questions for any or all of the speakers using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We have a couple of questions that have already started coming in, and as you continue to ask more questions, I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the moderator and begin with a question for Mr. Mohabit. You mentioned that you previously served representing Afghanistan in the United States in the 90s when the Taliban came to power. One of the questions that is debated currently is, have the Taliban changed? Are they different now than they were in the 90s? Are they more moderate? That's one of the questions that's being raised. What's your view on the Taliban that we see today?
Well, thank you. It's not easy to answer that question because you cannot read their minds. But what happened at that time? I mean, everybody knows the atrocity that Taliban were doing, killing innocent people and not allowing women to go to school, study, and also all these minorities, the ethnic minorities, they had hard time under the Taliban at that time. But now what they say they're changed, but we see those actions. What they're doing still, I can see that the same. First of all, they're the same Taliban. They're not changed. I mean, the leadership are the same. But what they say they're changed, but I don't see those changes a lot. Like still the schools are for the women, the schools are closed. There's no schools, and that they are forcing women to wear burqa. That they are not allowed to go to work because in Afghanistan there were lots of families that just the females were working because they lost their males, or maybe they were in the army or outside with their suicide attack, which Taliban killed their husbands or their sons or their male family members, and now they're not allowing them to go to work or bring food for their families. They say they're changed, but I don't see the changes. They have to have a broad-based government, have all these technocrats to run the country. The one that who knows. Like, I mean, if they want to run a country with the very, very basic knowledge, I think they're wrong. When at that time, 20 plus years ago in Afghanistan, there was no infrastructure and there were no government because we had civil war for the last 5 years and then fighting against the Russians. So that was very, very small government. And now it's totally different. There's a technology. They don't know anything about the technology. I mean, if someone comes from the village and they haven't seen computer in their life, and then suddenly they come and see all the technology, how can they run that? They don't know the importance of involving with the community, importance of female roles, importance of those people they know. Like now that we don't have any army. The army is gone. And like the Mr. Ambassador said about the weapons, how they control that. They don't have those generals to run those, to control those. And now that they one Taliban that they're sitting on the top of the helicopter, they don't know what that is. So I don't see the big changes in them that to be hopeful for them. I hope they change and they slowly bring their changes. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't see those big changes, and they're still under the influence of Pakistan, because I mean every country, like I said, Afghanistan, the location is where all the neighboring countries they're trying to influence Afghanistan, which they were, but especially Pakistan, because we have the long border with Pakistan, which is a Durand line that we never recognize that as an international border line, and the Pakistan is trying to bring a puppet government in Afghanistan, so that government will recognize that the Durand line, which they just like it was like Berlin Wall when the Russian did. I mean, they separate Germans in two countries. The same thing, the Durand lines run through the Pashtuns. So all the Pashtuns on the outside and this side, and we never recognize that as international borderline. So that's another thing also, and also they want to have a government in Afghanistan, so that they will be not friendly with India. So there's another problem again with Pakistan and Afghanistan with India. And now we have tension with all the other neighboring countries too, especially with Tajikistan. So I hope that the Taliban bring those changes. What they say they changed. But I don't see those changes. Like they destroyed the Buddha statue, which was the tallest statue in the world, 1,500 years was standing there, but they destroyed. Now I see when there's a small statue of the previous, like Mazari, which they destroyed that one too. So they're going to the same direction which they were before, but slowly, not that fast. But I think that if they don't bring those big changes, they will be not recognized as a legitimate government. And like the previous, Mr. Ambassador said, that the other problem we have with ISIS and all the opposition. Even good people, they may turn to ISIS because they think maybe that's the only one hope. I hope that the resistance front, which is Ahmad Massoud and the great Massoud's son, he could do something, and he could bring people around him. I don't see those things too. But I hope that doesn't happen, so all the opposition goes to ISIS, which that will be very, very dangerous for Afghanistan and for the world. But to make it short, I don't see those big changes in Taliban, unfortunately.
Thank you, Mr. Mohabit. We have several questions that have come in about the Taliban, and we'll have a question now for Mr. Kipiani and then Ambassador Shafiev. The question is, what kind of impact will the Taliban have on the South Caucasus? Is there any threat from the Taliban against the sovereignty and stability of the states in the South Caucasus? So Mr. Kipiani, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to Ambassador Shafiev.
Well, thank you for this question, which is really very critical from Georgian perspectives. And let me please provide you with some Georgian flavor, if you wish. Since we're not talking about the situation in Afghanistan proper, but there are various implications of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which has dynamized discussions of the West's alleged retreat from peripheral areas, if you will, and growing focus on a single core region. And the line that separates those regions of the world in which the West continues to pursue and defend its interests on a must basis from the secondary ones, in which the West could or would intervene on a highly discretionary basis, and only if a broader context is served. So that line has shifted westwards, and from my perspective, currently lies between the Black and Caspian Seas. In many respects, and hopefully the distinguished audience would agree with me, that this region, when we speak about South Caucasus in particular, has not only become a border along which geopolitical interests and influences clash, but also positions itself as a key safety locker for many security challenges originating in the Middle East, in the South Caucasus, or the southern flank of Eastern Europe. And therefore, the role and impact of the Black and Caspian, as I call it, intermarium, have indeed never been so meaningful and vital for the emerging Eurasian landscape as they are nowadays. And to expand a little bit more on the question, which is really very broad and very meaningful, it is also a new test for the West to prove its resilience, capability, and commitments in the new order that will arguably be premised on the regional proxy systems, and I call it more nicely regional hub and spoke model of the emerging international order. It is even more important for the West to increase the direct support it provides, to increase the capacity of its allies and partners to defend themselves in those regional systems in which the Western presence is not as direct or tangible as someone would wish. And therefore, the Black Sea, the Greater Caspian region, and the South Caucasus in particular, is clearly a region in which Western interests are reflected also in Georgia's regional posture and conducts, its national defensive capabilities, and foreign policy. I should necessarily mention that after the Afghans drama, this country finds itself in the crosshairs of anti-Western and anti-democratic offensives of various types, colors, and categories. And therefore, successful Western and democratic Georgia would serve as a test of the viability of the principles and values of the Western normative world. And those two sides of the matter, Dr. Todd, these days are strongly interconnected as to be inseparable. Once again, to emphasize that the controversy in Afghanistan has added to the regional dilemma in the aftermath of the Second Karabakh War. And the United States need to demonstrate that dedication to pursuing efforts to develop relations with key allies in this geopolitically important region. Last but not least, specific statements, which we saw in various tangible actions, must contribute to shaping Washington's Black Sea strategy concept along very clear lines, particularly as any delay in this process would further aggravate the security environment. And from my point, that delay could make any future U-turn quite hypothetical too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kipiani. And we'll go now to Ambassador Shafiev.
As I told in my introductory remarks, South Caucasus is not immediate neighbor, so probably we don't feel immediate threat from anything coming from Afghanistan. But of course, in the long term and in general, the destabilization of the situation in Afghanistan has an impact on South Caucasus and our region, let's say, not in the immediate periphery of Afghanistan. But I would like to turn to question in terms of really the Western engagement of the United States engagement. We have to, very shortly history, the United States and NATO went to Afghanistan because of ISIS and because of the Taliban was hosting ISIS. ISIS, the Al-Qaeda, I'm sorry. The resolutions of United Nations Security Council, what happened after 9/11. So in that sense, Al-Qaeda was defeated, basically destroyed. There are some elements left, but very small elements. But after that, as I mentioned already, the mission in Afghanistan became the mission of governance. And for 20 years which passed, my perception that the US foreign policy team was not so flexible, was not so quick to react to changes in Afghanistan and around, inside the country, around it. We feel, speaking frankly, that in the South Caucasus, for example, the situation has changed after 44 days Armenian-Azerbaijani war last year. But when I see what we hear from the US government officials, it's the same, sometimes recycled arguments, or let's say the position they voiced before the war, they voiced 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I don't want now to go to details. For example, we're speaking about some of this status issue in Karabakh, etc. It's already gone. I mean, you need really to follow what's going on the ground and react to it. I think the same mistake happened in Afghanistan. Mission in terms of the Al-Qaeda has completed. And then, of course, the governance of Afghanistan demanded different set of approaches. Where was the change of government, Karzai then to Ghani, and where was the very disputed elections with Abdullah. But I don't think the US really reacted to all that changes. They just followed one way, one avenue. The second, I think the problem was with the, United States and NATO, again, they act directly in Afghanistan, but traditionally, Americans had always the allies in the region with which it, cooperated on many issues in the Middle East. And that cooperation, I think, in terms of the, whether you like it or not, but Pakistan is the stakeholder, is the regional power in that part of the world. Another important ally is Turkey, NATO member. I don't think really the Americans' foreign policy, again, it's very complex issue which demands the separate discussion, but I don't think the Americans was really, can be argued that mistakes was done on one side, on the other side, but it was really complex development which needed to fix, sometimes to acknowledge, there's something which is going wrong on both sides, but was kind of the only blame game. So that, I think, left United States with no regional actors, allies. But probably maybe some pundit says that, United States really wanted to withdraw and came to that conclusion and didn't care much how it happens. But really, it had some negative repercussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shafiev. A couple questions now about ISIS and its relationship with the Taliban. I'm going to pose this question to Dr. Shaimurgenov. So I'm just going to read this question because it's quite detailed. The perceived wisdom in the West is that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are intertwined, while ISIS-K is separate and a sworn enemy of the Taliban. At the same time, we hear that widespread poverty drives many men to ally themselves with whichever faction is willing to pay $500 per month. From your perspective, how intertwined are these factions? To what degree can they be differentiated, and to what degree are the factions driven by ideology rather than sheer desire for political power and authority? I'm turning this one to you, Dr. Shaimurgenov, first, because you mentioned ISIS-K in your remarks and the fact that some of the members are from Central Asia, but then certainly we'll open it up to the other panelists as well.
Thank you, Dr. Todd, for the question. I would just say that when we speak about the Taliban and ISIS is just we need to choose between good terrorists and bad terrorists. Yes, it's just the same, you know, like, because what we see now is just the same warriors who just fight between each other for the power, but their ideology is the same. But we need to differ Taliban and ISIS in terms that, for example, Taliban has no official goal to attack and capture Central Asia. ISIS officially several years ago officially recognized Central Asia as a territory of their real interest, called as Khorasan. Yes, so that's why we see, if we speak about good and bad terrorists, of course Taliban looks more attractive. And another side is the members of ISIS. They have a lot of people from Central Asia. So that's a direct threat. They will try to get more people from our region and to affect our stability. It's one story. And about the poverty, when we speak about poverty, we speak about drug production and trafficking, because we don't believe that Taliban will abandon and will stop any drug production, because they need money for their economy. They need money to pay to people, because as we know, international reserves of Afghanistan are now blocked, and there is no any evidence that this money can be unblocked in the coming months. So and for example, as I said before, ISIS does not abandon and stop any drug production, and they look more attractive to local authorities in different regions of Afghanistan, and they just can put ISIS flag and continue drug trafficking and production. So that's the issue.
Thank you, Dr. Shaimurgenov. Dr. Umarov, would you care to respond to that question? And I would also add, what do you think the threat is to Uzbekistan at this time?
Thanks a lot. So definitely ISIS phenomena is quite interesting in Afghanistan, and considering its presence for the last 7-8 years on the soil of Afghanistan, until recently, ISIS was quite low profile in this country. We could see mainly ISIS activities in the Nangarhar province, which is close to the Pakistani border, and there was some limited information about their activities in the northern Afghanistan. But there were no from time to time there were some terrorist attacks, but not such how many like happened recently. So it looks like, at least from my perspectives, that someone is using ISIS as a mechanism to legitimize Taliban as soon as possible. As Dr. Shaimurgenov said, if there is a choice between good and bad terrorists, and Taliban is playing this good role and ISIS is bad role. So kind of option, if you don't support these guys, we will have this worse option. So they can come and take lead on the situation, especially considering that they initially made explosions in the Hazara Shia mosques. As soon as there was a blame on Taliban, they are not providing proper security to these minority groups in Afghanistan, they immediately conducted attack on Sunni mosques and some other hospitals and etc. So there, at least my assumption that there is something, this group is quite mysterious from my perspective, and it looks like someone is using it as a tool, a mechanism for quick legitimization of Taliban, which can kind of tackle them and provide security and stability on the territory of Afghanistan. But besides ISIS, from the Central Asian perspective, there are several other groups which can pose secure threats to the region, like this famous Islamic movement of Turkistan, which is also quite low profile now, but according to some information, they still exist and they do not disappear at all. Katibat al-Jihad al-Imam Bukhari also, and some other groups which are posing threats to Tajikistan, for example. So these are real groups which are still active on this territory. But the issue with them, they have quite good links with Taliban, And this is one of the reasons, again, why Central Asians are active in dealing with Taliban, with the hope, which is not guaranteed yet, with the hope that Taliban can somehow deal with these groups and eliminate the security threats to them. But of course, we need some time to have a proper assessment of these issues, and it's still not very clear.
Thank you, Dr. Umarov. Since the theme for this session is a unified regional approach, we have several questions that have come in about regional organizations as well as regional approaches and engagement with Afghanistan. A question that will start with Ambassador Shafiev, because you mentioned both pipelines and the Lapis Lazuli corridor in your comments. We have a question: can Afghanistan still play a productive role in regional goals of connectivity? And if so, how? I think you started to allude to that in your comments. So if you care to elaborate on that, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the panel.
Well, I think sooner or later will be some approach to the current leadership of Afghanistan. And I think we see development that many actors, China, Russia, already met with Taliban leaders. If I'm not mistaken, in Brussels, the U.S. New U.S. envoy Tom West also met with the representative, or had a meeting about the Taliban, how the future engagement. Now, probably I'm not in position to tell right now what will be, whether it will come recognition or not. But some regional actors, which I mentioned around Afghanistan, said that we need to engage with the current government. When it happens, probably we have to think about Afghanistan's economy. Everyone speak about dependence on the Afghans' problem with the drug production, trafficking. The way how we can, the international community can act in Afghanistan economically is to create incentives for the people, create jobs, and that means the involvement of Afghanistan into regional projects. And I mentioned, I think there's still the valid to think about both the transportation corridor and the gas pipeline from the Caspian, resources delivering, for example, Turkmen resources or Caspian resources to the global market. But really, it's hard now to tell. Probably we need first to have stabilization. And no one now is think about such a long-term engagement in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Ambassador Shafiev. Mr. Kipiani, would you care to respond to that? Can Afghanistan still play a productive role in regional connectivity?
Thank you for your question. I still completely share the points made by previous speaker that primarily the issue at this stage is about security, and once again security. And from Georgian perspectives, I should necessarily point out in a few words that although Afghanistan is geographically far from Georgia, still it matters for us a lot. It mattered during the Afghan campaign because we have participated very actively in NATO-led operations in Afghanistan. And in 2012, 2014, Georgia had up to 1,500 soldiers in Afghanistan, and we lost dozens of officer soldiers there. And most recently, we have supported the withdrawal of NATO and partner forces from Afghanistan and providing them with host nation support and full transit facilities. Also important was Georgian humanitarian contribution to the process. Georgia has set up interagency task force, providing with critical input to ensure the transit of forces and personnel and related support measures. Tbilisi has also agreed to help several international organizations like Asian Development Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank to evacuate their staff and provide them with temporary accommodation in Georgia. But the critical issue, in few words, is post-Afghan campaign. And that's again also about the security, because abandoning Afghanistan does not mean abandoning a critical region, which is full of threats and challenges. And I mean, trusting the new Taliban government that when the latter has promised to sever its links with various terrorist groups, probably it remains to be seen, how this promise could be fulfilled. And therefore, some nearby presence of US troops is critical to monitor, assess, and react if and when required. During the Geneva summit, President Putin took a firm stance, and we all remember that, against any US presence in Central Asia, regardless of the form. The problem is compounded by the logistical difficulties posed by the great distance to be covered by US aviation based in Qatar in order to reach Afghanistan and the wider region. And besides, we should also take into account Russia and China, who are together are opposed to the very principle of any US return to Central Asia. And these days, Russia is positioning more as a security guarantor, while China is primarily contributing to economics of the Central Asia. We must also not to forget the, historical reluctance, if I may, of the Central Asian countries to harbor foreign troops on their territories. Understandably enough, in both their actions and messages, the various governments of Central Asia have to tread very carefully when dealing with the main actors, particularly as the risks in the region are very high and very real. Therefore, again, to emphasize that all those complexities lead us to the need to identify some other alternative modalities or viable options. And I believe that the Greater Caspian region and the Black Sea, in the first place, present us with some feasible opportunities to contribute to the efforts of the Western coalition to combat international terrorism and extremism. All in all, from my standpoint, Dr. Todd, the Black Sea and the Caspian region are critically important to the greater Eurasian security landscape. In this regard, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, it's not just about messaging an entry into the new stage of the great game for power, but the recent meetings in Moscow between officials from Russia, Afghanistan, China, Pakistan, Iran, and India clearly herald new geopolitical spirals. And therefore, the wider South Caucasus, Central Asia, Caucasus, and South Asia, Central Asia, and Caucasus region could or would fall prey to a new wave of terrorism and radicalization. Therefore, I believe that regardless of different foreign policy objectives, this is a win-win game for all the stakeholders involved. And again, to emphasize that working out a united, coherent, greater Caspian region policy by the West and by the United States is very critical for Georgia as its linchpin in the region and for the rest of the countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kipiani. Mr. Mohabit, the next question goes to you. What role could a unified regional bloc play in either incorporating or countering a Taliban-led Afghanistan?
Before I answer to that, I want to go back to the ISIS question, and maybe if I can talk about that for a little bit. First of all, we didn't have ISIS in Afghanistan when the ISIS emerged in Iraq or Syria, in that area. We didn't have that. But the ISIS that we have now, they were the member of Taliban. They didn't emerge. I mean, we have, of course, in ISIS, they're from Central Asian country also. We have, they're member of those countries there too. I mean, but they are member. They were member of Taliban. So when now what these bombers in Shia, especially, which is the minority in Afghanistan, and they were under the pressure or under atrocity of Taliban before too. So now who can say that these bombs were done by ISIS? Who can prove that? I mean, people say that all these bombs and these killings and these suicide attack, which they were doing it before, and they allowed them. And now suddenly it's haram, it's prohibited. So that they're doing that, so they could show that, okay, we are good people, we are not bad people. So these are the ISIS's bad people. I mean, you have to recognize us so we can control them. And my thinking is that these things are done by the Taliban, by themselves, so they can put pressure on the international society or other countries to help them and recognize them. But I think that the international society or countries, they have to put, first of all, put pressure on Taliban to correct themselves, to have broad-based government, to have all the other ethnic groups, the minorities have in the women's in their government, and then they can run the countries, and then they will be recognized. I don't know if they will be still. They were a terrorist group, and they're still the same unless they have to show their change. So these things are, my thinkings, are done by them through their members, and they could blame ISIS. ISIS was not that. They were in northeast part of Afghanistan, just in that small areas. But now suddenly that they're everywhere, I have some doubts about that. And now that the Afghan, if it's peace and stable Afghanistan, of course, that will have a lots of economical impact on the Central Asia. And also with the Caspian countries, because like I said in my remarks, that all these countries, like we need them, and they need Afghanistan too. If they want to run the pipe, that the Tape pipeline through Afghanistan to Pakistan and India, they need stable Afghanistan. If China wants to send their goods through Afghanistan to Iran or the other countries like Kazakhstan or even Russia, and they want to sell their gases to Pakistan and India, they need Afghanistan. So we have to have a stable, peaceful government, and how to achieve that, I think that we have to have all these neighboring countries, they have to sit together and find a solution for Afghanistan, and they present it to the Taliban. And this is for if they want to be recognized, they have to follow the international rules. They have to really bring peace and stability. They have to distance themselves from Al-Qaeda. I haven't seen any declaration from Taliban that they distance themselves from Al-Qaeda. So now that they want to bring ISIS, and then hidden that they will keep their ties with Al-Qaeda. I'm afraid that Al-Qaeda will emerge again under the leadership of Taliban, because they had very, very close and strong ties with Al-Qaeda. When they were in Pakistan, they had those ties with Al-Qaeda, and they still have those ties with Al-Qaeda. Their leaders came to eastern part of Afghanistan, and they're still there under the Taliban controlled areas. So Taliban has to distance themselves from them, and also bring the broad-based government in Afghanistan. So then they may be recognized with other countries, and then if we have peace and stability in Afghanistan, that, of course, will be economically and also politically help all these neighboring and Caspian countries.
Thank you, Mr. Mohabit. While you were speaking, I got a heads up from Dr. Shaimergenov that he wanted to come back and comment on ISIS and the Taliban. So we'll let him do his interjection, and then I have a question for Dr. Umarov.
Thank you so much for all the speakers. It was very interesting to hear some opinions about the ISIS and Taliban relations. But I would just say maybe not to rely much on some opinions. The Taliban does all these attacks themselves, because every attack, for example, in the country today, is just a demonstration of Taliban's disability as a governors, that they cannot control situation in the country. And for example, if we analyze the tactics of ISIS attacks during these months, so we can see the shift in the ISIS attacks. For example, compared to previous 7 months, today ISIS targets mainly to Taliban security forces rather than the civilian population. So it means that the war goes on with Taliban, but not with civil population that ISIS would love to recruit on roles. So that's why the leadership of ISIS is intended to discredit the Taliban as a force that's capable to take the situation in Afghanistan under control. That's why. And especially today, ISIS focuses on operations in regions where the ethnic and religious minorities live in Afghanistan to provoke negative reaction from the local population to Taliban. That's just a little note from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shaimergenov. Going to Dr. Umarov, a question for you, because in your comments, you talked about how the current approach is very much bilateral in dealing with both the Taliban and addressing issues related to Afghanistan. Because you're advocating for more of a regional approach, do you think that recent events provide the impetus for forming a regional security bloc? We tend to think of either the Collective Security Treaty Organization or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as kind of the regional organizations that would address security. But do you think that there is space for a Central Asia only focused bloc?
Thank you very much for this very interesting question. Just 2 cents from my side to Dr. Shaimergenov's comment on ISIS-Taliban, then I will forward to your question. When we're discussing this ISIS-Taliban relations and the kind of existing problems between them, we should also consider for the fact that Taliban itself is not something solid, is not kind of unified in movement. It has many internal divisions, fractions, and now more and more evidence is coming about these difficulties between and finding something common between the different fractions within Taliban. So this moment that maybe some different fractions are using this ISIS or in some relations with ISIS to provoke this kind of reaction and to provoke kind of more reliability on the Taliban as a source of providing stability and security, maybe also a part of this kind of strategy to get better and quicker acknowledgement of Taliban. So regarding your question, so when I talked about regional approach, I mostly meant this political and economic coordination. I don't think that we are on the stage in the region to build some kind of purely regional security blocks. I think we are at the initial stage of regional enhancement of regional cooperation. It's not about integration yet. So I think we should coordinate our efforts and concentrate more our politics on coordinating our efforts in helping Afghanistan. So all countries, especially the ones which has neighboring part with Afghanistan, they all have their own programs of building infrastructure, providing, enhancing trade opportunities, supporting some provinces which are just across the border from their country, like was Turkmenistan was working with Faryab, Jawzjan, Herat. Uzbekistan was Balkh. Tajikistan was Kunduz and Badakhshan. But all of them are doing this on bilateral level. Of course, it's their border, it's their direct neighborhood. But the problem, we are creating infrastructure, we are creating opportunities, but they're not linked to each other. So the benefits of this infrastructure are still limited. If we can't find the ways to connect this infrastructure, it will lead to in connectivity even within Afghanistan. So we are helping to connect Afghanistan with outside world, but internal connectivity of Afghanistan itself very poor here. So Balkh is very poorly connected to Kandahar or Helmand. It's very well connected to Uzbekistan, but it has almost very limited connection with the rest of Afghanistan. Of course, we are investing in the development of Afghanistan, but if we support this more internal connectivity within Afghanistan, so the projects like this Peshawar, Mazar Sharif Peshawar Railway is part of this. So TAPI project potential can be part of this. So it goes all the territory of Afghanistan, though they can invest in this internal connectivity. So I would support more this political and economic coordination. So why we cannot have, at least if we have difficulties in finding something very tangible for very high level leaders meeting in Central Asia, why we cannot host at least a deputy foreign ministers level meeting in Central Asia or in South Asia discussing Afghanistan, and at least providing some symbolic declaration that we as a region very concerned, we as a region pledge to support Afghanistan. But of course, it shouldn't be considered as transferring this responsibility of Afghanistan purely to the region. Definitely the region will need support and coordination with broader international community.
Thank you, Dr. Umarov. I'm going to open that question up to others on the panel if anyone else would like to respond. Comment on regional blocks or regional connectivity. Ambassador Shafiev?
Yeah, I just would like to what Mr. Akram Umarov said. I mentioned that the role of regional actors is important in this regard. Engagement traditionally, for example, the Americans was engaging its allies locally, and I mentioned Turkey would like again bring to the attention. Well, it has been. Somebody said that the schools for girls is closed, shut down by Taliban. But according to my information, 14 Turkish schools for girls were reopened. So it looks like indeed Turkey has some sort of, I wouldn't say, influence, or at least the understandings. The Kabul airport also, the operation, though limited, resumed. The Kabul-Dubai, the flights reopened, and from my information, Turkish specialists, we are providing the air traffic services for Kabul airport. There is the conversation about the opening. It was mentioned Balkh and the airport in Balkh. The Uzbek experts involved in reopening the Balkh airport. So I think at that point, countries like Turkey can, and some other countries, neighboring countries, can provide really important assistance and can be, how to say, the intermediaries, in the reopening of Afghanistan as a country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. The country that we haven't talked too much about is Iran, and we have a question about how will Iranian Taliban relations evolve, particularly given their troubled relationship in the 1990s. I think we'll go to Mr. Mohabit and then Mr. Kipiani for your thoughts on this.
Iran has a big role in Afghanistan in peace and stability. They had it before and also now also. And especially they have interest in Afghanistan for the minority Shia, which were under the atrocity of Taliban in the 90s, and they don't want to see that. But during when the U.S. Army were present in Afghanistan, Iran was also they were thinking a threat of the army, which would the relationship were tension most of the time with the United States and Iran. They had another U.S. army by their neighboring countries. They were helping Taliban at that time. So Iran is happy that ISAF and NATO and all the U.S. army are gone from Afghanistan. And they are slowly building a relationship with Taliban. They don't want to go to the same route that they had before. They were almost, one time when the Taliban killed their diplomats in Mazar-e-Sharif in the consulate, and Iran, they brought, I think, around 200,000 soldiers. They were trying to occupy Afghanistan at that time. The tension was very high, but Iran is trying to not escalate any tension with Taliban, and they're in talk with them. Their embassy is open, so that and also their the Taliban, they don't see Iran like they were seeing Iran at 20 years ago as their enemy. They don't see them their enemy, what at least that they show that they talk to them. So Iran has a big role in bringing peace and stability, helping the infrastructure, building Afghanistan, and the Taliban is seeking their help in Afghanistan. They do.
Thank you, Mr. Mohabit. Mr. Kipiani.
Yes, of course, Iran has its own say and has its own role, but from the South Caucasian perspectives, I would be arguing that in the broader context, the Iranian stance is a bit lukewarm, if I may, and this is understandable because Iran, if I'm not mistaken, is the only country which has diplomatic and strong diplomatic ties with every single country in the greater region, in the broader region. And of course, Iranians would love to make a meaningful say, but I expect that meaningful say would be a wish list only, and would be reflected through various regional platforms. And Iranians are pushing very hard, especially when it comes to the South Caucasus. And we had about a few controversial the platforms, but still, their own agenda. This is one point where Iran would be trying to align or to realign its policy with the policy of, say, regional powers. And the second point, which would be limiting Iran's influence, is exposure of Turkey and increasing exposure of Turkey in the region. And therefore, I think that the sort of the pushes Iran to Russia, makes it to lean towards Russia, and combine its efforts with Russian efforts. So I think that, of course, Iran would not disappear from the radars, but I think, probably arguably enough, but still, that their voice would not be as powerful and as someone were expecting. And the last sentence, please, if I may, when I was listening to the colleagues from Central Asia, one of the very bizarre things of the modern world, that not only positive agenda could unite the countries, but sometimes the negative agenda. So what happens in Afghanistan and what is happening in Afghanistan could hopefully push Central Asian countries for very pragmatic reasons to combine their efforts and to create something, which unfortunately, I should admit, we in South Caucasus have not accomplished so far, to provide, for more regional and sustainable framework. And I think that in that respect, that unfortunately negative agenda could help the Central Asian countries to form up in one way or another, either security bloc or the economic bloc. So this is probably the last point to address your question, Dr. Tol. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kipiani. Dr. Umarov, I see your hand up, so we'll go to you for your interjection.
Thanks a lot. So I would like to add briefly about Iran and Taliban. So I think that these tensions between Iran and Taliban, they were back in 1990s. I think now they have maybe not excellent, but still very good relations. So the relations developed especially in 2010s based on these commonalities in assessment of enemies. So they had kind of common targets to reach. So this made their understanding of each other much better. So we shouldn't forget, for example, the fact that one of the previous leaders of Taliban, Mr. Mullah Mansour, was killed when he was returning from his trip to Iran. So even the highest leadership of Taliban was quite frequent visitors of Iran. And at that period, even one of the shuras of Taliban, Mashhad Shura, was established in the Iranian territory and gained some support from Iranian side. So it means that Iran has good links with different fractions of Taliban. It had very comprehensive relations. It didn't mean that it has a kind of huge influence and kind of move with Taliban or whatever they want, but it means that Taliban will try to acknowledge the interests of Iran and to follow some of these very important issues which Iran is raising. Now, with the fact that Taliban is not against of delivering some support to a Shia minority in Afghanistan from Iran, and the fact that Iran is still Iranian border is open for Afghan citizens. So during the last couple of months, more than 300,000 Afghan citizens flew from Afghanistan to Iran. Now, Iran is hosting a huge number of Afghan refugees. So it is also a contribution to softening this negative consequences of this takeover and easing this the economic problems inside the country. So these are, I think, some important issues which Iran is contributing. Regarding this 2 cents on these regional blocs, I think there is still a huge importance of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, not just in terms of military exchange, but I think that one of the questions about intelligence sharing. So one of the best mechanisms which I think Shanghai Cooperation Organization could establish was this regional anti-terrorist structure in Tashkent. So that's mainly this representatives of intelligence services of Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries are based in Tashkent, and it's a good platform for exchange of information. I think this kind of exchange is very active now, but CSTO also playing its role, especially in the countries where it has the countries where which are members of this organization. But again, the rest, I don't think that we are ready for creating some, and it's not in an interest of regional countries. Despite the some kind of disagreements inside Central Asia, from external vision, you can see some Tajikistan has slightly different approach. I think the concerns which Tajikistan has, they are shared with almost all Central Asian countries, but the way to deliver these concerns and to deal with these concerns, there is a big difference. So Tajikistan prefers different way. The rest of the countries prefer different approach in solving these concerns and trying to find some responses to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Umarov, and we'll go to Dr. Shemergenov for his interjection.
Thank you so much. I would love just to add to Mr. Caspian's words about that's really a must agenda of Afghanistan. I would say we have a common agenda on Afghanistan, even from Central Asia, because if you can check in the beginning of August in Turkmenistan, all the leaders of the countries just met for informal consultations, and one of the key topics of that meeting was Afghanistan situation. So, of course, Mr. Akramov just said that there are different approaches to Afghanistan, what kind of measures
I think we're losing your connection, Dr. Shaimarganov. I think we lost him. So with the few minutes that we have remaining in this session, if we can start and go around to our different panelists, I think one of the lingering questions that remains is how to immediately deal with Afghanistan and the Taliban in the near term. As we've discussed at length in today's session, there is no desire to grant legitimacy to the Taliban government. As Dr. Shaimarganov mentioned in his remarks, they are essentially terrorists. So is it good terrorists, bad terrorists when you're weighing them against ISIS? So we don't want to grant them legitimacy. However, as more and more countries start working with the Taliban out of necessity, you are essentially granting them de facto legitimacy by acknowledging their existence as the government of Afghanistan. But what does this mean for our countries in the Caspian region in the near term? What should they be doing to either engage or not engage with the Taliban in order to work with Afghanistan? We'll start with our speakers in the order that they spoke earlier. So we'll start with Mr. Caspian and then go to Mr. Mohabbat. So Mr. Caspian, you get to do your closing remarks first.
Well, I fully appreciate that. As I've said, we have a bit some differences, to put this in a way, in foreign policy trajectories, and historical background matters and agendas matters. Again, from Georgian perspective, it matters very much, where the West stands in the region and where that policy is, and ideally we would welcome unequivocal responses to those policies, because Georgia is punching above its weight. And it's really very critical for us, since we're covering our path of the world, to unite with the community with whom we share the same principles and the same objectives, for that community to cover their own path. And therefore, when I spoke about Afghanistan in particular, I was also hinting about difficult, not just hinting, but saying explicitly about difficult security environment in the region, and also hinting to various compensatory security modalities for democracies like Georgia is. And this is my very strong appeal to our allies and partners. We need to cover that road jointly and hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caspian, and we'll go now to Mr. Mohabbat.
Well, there were lots of mistakes happened when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan. When the Bonn Accord happened, they could bring Taliban on that peace negotiation at that time, and they could be part of the government, not oppositions. But those mistakes happened, and also when that was in Doha Accord, when at that time the other mistake was that the Afghan government was not involved in those peace accords. So the legitimacy was indirectly given to the Taliban. Now the Taliban are in Afghanistan, so this is the question: what we have to do. Do we have to keep fighting with them, or do we have to work with them? And different countries, different people, they have different opinions. What to do. I mean, like I said, still there are in some point of view, there's still terrorist organization. Like I said, also, they have to make sure that they are not. They have to distance themselves from those terrorist organizations, and they have to obey the rules of regulations of the international society and work with them. Now invading against Afghanistan to get rid of Taliban, that's not a question. That should not be on the table. So we have to, the international society, they have to put pressure on the Taliban any way that they can, so that they have to bring the, like I said, the broad-based government, work with the international society, because this is, if there's a peace in Afghanistan, that's a beneficiary for, if the Taliban do what the international society is asking for them, of course they will be recognized as a legitimate government in Afghanistan. So they have to obey those. That's for their benefits, and also for the regional countries, for the far distant countries. Again, the peace and stability in Afghanistan, it's very important. But if that's de-escalate and we have another civil war in Afghanistan, that will go to the neighboring countries too. First of all, that will go to Pakistan, because the Taliban faction exists in Pakistan, and the same kind of thinking that the Afghan Taliban has, that in Pakistan they have too. And then in India and all those countries, that will be a disaster for the region. So the international society has to work with Taliban and try to change them. Like they say that we change, they have to show that they are changed. They have to bring all those technocrats, all those people that they can run the government. I mean, their mullah Haibatullah could be on the top. Let them be there. But all the other people, when you see those pictures, when they themselves says that I don't have a knowledge, but I was appointed to this post, like the one, their chief of passport or something, that he said in the news that I don't know anything about these things. I don't know how to run these things, but they appointed me. So that they have to, well, we still have those people which they're, there are people are trying to leave Afghanistan, and I mean, like hundreds, thousands of the young generation that came to the United States, and every day 3,000 Afghans are going to Iran and to the north and to the east. When one day that the border in Pakistan is open, there, I mean, thousand people will run to escape. So the Taliban has to show their good face and their good faith toward Afghans and toward international society, so that then they will be recognized, and it's for their benefit and for the benefit of the whole region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohabit. Ambassador Shafiev, your final remarks.
Yes, well, Azerbaijan is not the immediate neighbor or direct stakeholder in issues of Afghanistan. So what the government of Azerbaijan, the leader of the president of Azerbaijan recently said, that we will follow the footsteps or the decision by global and regional powers. So United Nations termed the whether to recognize the new government in Afghanistan. So, but as I said, I think what we see to trend that on the countries really think about engagement in Afghanistan. On November 10th, India hosted Central Asian countries, to discuss the issues in Afghanistan. On the next day, Islamabad also hosted in our meeting Troika, Japan, China, US, and United States itself. On the next day, on November 12th, they signed the agreement with Qatar, and Qatar diplomatic mission in Afghanistan is going to act as the mission of interest, U.S. interest in Afghanistan. So we see, incrementally, it's kind of the engagement. So I will just back to Azerbaijan. We'll wait the decision of the countries primarily involved, and in the relationship with Afghanistan, and I mean in terms of the influence and leverages. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shafiev. And Dr. Shaimarganov, over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Todd. Just to say that, yes, when we speak about Afghanistan, we understand that we received a long-term drama, long-term destabilization just across the borders into Central Asia. But another positive thing, what Mr. Caspian just said, that we need to have a common agenda. We have common agenda. In Central Asia, we have common agenda, how to defend our borders, how to defend and support each other against the real risks from Afghanistan. Even Turkmenistan, that is not member of any regional bloc, if we mention August meeting in Turkmenbashi, Afghanistan was one of the key points in the agenda negotiations between the leaders, how to support Turkmenistan if it has any kind of challenge from Afghanistan. And if we speak about the wider regional level, for example, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we have a common discussions about Afghanistan among Central Asian countries, Russia, China, Pakistan, India, and Iran now, and it's announced to be a member of SCO. So SCO will have a new kind of mission, how to solve Afghanistan issues in next 10 years, so maybe like that. So it's one of the positive things that we have more unity in the region. Thank you.
Dr. Shaimarganov, and the final word goes to Dr. Umarov.
Thank you. So two things which I would like to mention at the end about this recognition of Taliban. Again, it's a bit a tricky question. So international community was quite fine when Taliban recaptured Kabul even without any fight, and it was quite acknowledged this fact. But now this recognition is a big issue, though there are a lot of requirements to Taliban. Of course, they're fair, these requirements, especially on the issues of human rights, gender issues. But I don't think we should expect too much from Taliban. So I don't think Taliban is ready for dramatic change, shift from its initial ideology, its position. So I think we should have we should a bit lower our expectations of what can happen in Afghanistan. And in this term, I think we should be very careful. And with the fact that in my count, at least in the last 48 years, this was 7th forceful regime change in Afghanistan. And I am not sure that Afghanistan can afford one more forceful change in the near future without facing the kind of fate of being fully fragmented, divided country, which I think is in no interest of any neighboring, at least any neighboring country of this region. So in this hand, I think it's important to develop, again, coordinated efforts. We shouldn't think more about kind of unilateral strategies, how to fix Afghanistan. The previous experience demonstrated that this kind of approach will be failed in most cases. So we should think of having more coordinated, more broader strategy which involves more actors, especially the countries which are neighbors of Afghanistan, why we shouldn't ignore their voices, their concerns, and their interests. They are the neighbors with Afghanistan. They have direct interest in its prospective, in its prosperous, stable, and predictable future. So in these terms, I think we should develop more kind of platforms which unite us rather than divide. We should try to limit this huge number of platforms which now exist around Afghanistan. I think we talk too much on Afghanistan, but we did very little. It's time for action. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Umarov, and thank you to all of our panelists in this session for your frank and very detailed analysis during today's discussion. I'm going to turn the microphone over now to Dr. Roger Kangas for closing remarks.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian Todd. Excellent moderation, and you definitely got our speakers, our panelists to engage, and also want to offer thanks to them for their insightful comments. Again, this issue of looking at Afghanistan, the security challenges around it is a hard one, and these final sort of go around the table, you raised more questions, I think, that are worth discussing, and we're going to do that tomorrow. I also want to thank, by the way, our interpreters for helping us out for those, in the Russian language, and our audience for the wonderful questions addressed. As I said, tomorrow we're going to be looking at interregional security cooperation. So perhaps less talk, more action. Let's see how that goes. The myriad of organizations that have discussed Afghanistan and the broader South Central Asia security space, we know them. Well, let's see, looking ahead, what can be done. And as Professor Todd noted, might there be a regionally structured security focus that doesn't bring in all these outsiders? Ambassador Richard Hoagland will be moderating that discussion, and we will hear from a number of wonderful speakers to include Ambassador Ron Newman, who will be the keynote speaker, as well as Ambassador Ali Jalali, who was the former Interior Minister of Afghanistan and that country's ambassador to Germany. And so it's going to be, I think, an exciting session tomorrow, same time, and we look forward to seeing you there. Afghan, any final words?
No, thank you, Matt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you all, and have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.